Hello and welcome back to Democracy, everybody. Welcome back to Helldivers 2, where we are going to be ranking all of the orbital strikes versus the bots today. I did this ranking them all against all of the things, but some of my opinions have changed, and also I didn't think that was a really great way that video turned out, just because certain stratagems are definitely better against certain groups. So this is going to be specifically for the Automatons. We will be doing this for the bugs and for the squids as well. Let's begin with the very first one, which is the Orbital Precision Strike. The Orbital Precision Strike is only a 3-button input. You get this as soon as you enter the game, so you don't have to buy this at all. It doesn't cost you anything. This has an extremely short cooldown of only 90 seconds. That's at its highest. It can actually go quite a bit lower. At its lowest, it goes down to about 75 seconds. So this comes up really often, and you can toss this out. This is really good for taking out basically everything that the bots have. You can take out tanks with this. You can take out bot factories with this. You can even just throw this into groups of enemies, and it does reasonably well. The Precision Strike against the bots is really good. And if you get really good at throwing this, then this one is absolutely amazing. I'm going to put this one all the way up into S tier. I think it's really good against the Automatons. It's going to be more dependent on your skill level, though, where if you aren't way great at throwing these precisely at where you need to, it's going to be less useful than it would otherwise be, and maybe it would drop down a tier then. But even so, like, it comes up so often that you should never really be afraid of throwing at your Precision Strike, because the worst thing that happens, well, I guess the worst thing that happens is you go to throw it, it drops out of your hand and it lands next to you and then it blows you up, or your friends up. That would technically be the worst. But even then, it's fairly unlikely to do that just because it doesn't hit in that big of an area. So you might actually be able to survive that, especially if you're wearing like explosion armor. So that could be something to worry about, but generally the worst thing that's going to happen with precision strikes is you throw them out and they just don't hit anything. In which case, it's very similar to like the EATs, where it's like, who cares? They're going to come up in another minute. I can throw it out again and see what I hit. So long as you're getting some value from it, I think it's pretty great. Up next, we have the Orbital Gatling Barrage. This one's pretty cool. You throw this one out and it just starts spraying down bullets on top of the general area. The area is fairly tight, so you don't have to worry about this spreading out too far. It's pretty easy to actually stand fairly close to the Gatling Barrage and still be out of danger, although you can still die from this. This one can potentially destroy buildings. It's not super effective at doing that, though. It can also hurt basically everything the bots have, but it's going to be best against the medium and the small bots. Like, technically this thing can take out things like a tank, but it's very unlikely to unless the tank just stops there in the middle of it, which it could, especially if you combine this with like the EMS Strike or something where you just hold it in place. It's not guaranteed, but it could do some pretty good damage. This is mostly good for crowd control, and it's okay against the bots. I find this one to be a whole lot better against the bugs and the squids, since you can just like throw this directly on where they're spawning and kill them very quickly. With the bots, you can kind of do that, but there's still probably going to be bigger enemies like the Hulks that can just tank through this and keep going after you, or like the tanks. Bigger enemies are more common with the bots, so I find the Gatling Barrage to be a little bit less useful. I'm still going to put this one up into B tier, though. I still think it's a pretty decent stratagem if you want to take it for them. Then we've got the Orbital Air Burst. This one is unlocked at level 5. It's fairly cheap to buy. It comes up pretty often. This one's only a 3-button input. You throw it out, and then it just basically shoots down a bunch of shrapnel on top of the enemies. This is really good for crowd control, once again similar to the Gatling Barrage, but I find it less consistent. This thing, for some reason, seems to seek out yourself or teammates way more often than other stratagems do. I don't know why. Sometimes it'll be firing in a general area, and it shouldn't be that much bigger than the Gatling Barrage, but sometimes it just walks itself around, and that can be kind of annoying. It also just doesn't have the same penetration as like the Gatling Barrage. It's basically a weaker version of the Gatling Barrage that has more of a chance to hit friendlies. On lower difficulties against the bots, this one isn't bad because you can cover a decent area and it will kill the small and medium bots pretty quickly, but the bigger bots can shrug this one off pretty well, and it can just sometimes be more of a hazard to yourself. I would say the Gatling Barrage is basically a better version of this, so I'm going to put this one into C tier. I don't think it's one of the best ones for bots. Up next, we have the Orbital Napon Barrage. This one is pretty cool. This one just drops a bunch of fire on top of the enemies, and it's really good for crowd control. It can still take out buildings so long as the projectiles hit directly, so it's not going to be as effective as like the other barrages for actually taking out buildings or big things, but it is better for like the crowd control since it has the fire lingering on the ground and you can kill enemies. This is really good once again for killing the medium and the small bots. Doesn't do a whole lot to the big bots, and this one does have kind of a long cooldown on it. So the Napon Barrage can be a little bit awkward, and I'm going to put it up into B tier. I think it's much better against bugs and squids once again, because you just generally don't need as much crowd control for the bots as those enemies. Or I find like the Napon Barrage is really devastating towards bugs and can be really devastating towards squids. It's not as much towards bot. It's still perfectly fine though, and if you want to take like all barrages, that's a very fun build to run around with. Up next we got the 120 barrage. The 120 barrage is probably the best of these type of barrages, mostly because it has the shortest cooldown. You can also get this very early on. The area that it covers is pretty good. If you throw this into the center of a bot compound, there's a good chance you can just knock out all the structures in it, and you don't even need to go into that area. There might be one or two left over, but if you brought something like the recoilless rifle or EATs or the spear or something like that, you can probably take out those remaining buildings. This can also deal tons of damage to all of the bots, and since it comes up so often, it is super, super useful. I'm going to put this one also up into S tier. It's very nice. Up next, we have the walking barrage, which is also really good against bots. It has extremely long range, which is really, really nice for the bots since they also have long range. They tend to have longer range than like the squids or the bugs. Usually, it depends. Sometimes those enemies can snipe you too, especially like when we had the Super Earth, I can't remember what they were called, that the squids had that could just snipe you out of nowhere, even in a city setting, so that was kind of bad. But generally the bots have the most effective long range to actually fight you with. This gets you even longer range, so you can just walk this barrage into a target. This can be really useful for knocking out certain objectives or softening up objectives before you go to attack it. Like it can be really good for the detector towers or for the jammers, since you can throw it well before you actually get there and then walk this into the actual objective. That's really nice. And you can still clear up buildings really easily with this. This can't clear up giant areas because you just have pretty much the lane that the walking barrage is in, unless you have teammates that are also throwing them down, in which case then yeah, you can clear up an entire large structure with it. It's not bad at all, and if you're really used to it, the walking barrage is really, really nice. I'm going to put this one up into A tier. I find it very consistent for the bots. Up next we have the 380 barrage. This one shoots the same rounds as like the walking barrage does, but you have a bigger AoE, so you can throw it into a compound, and once again, you can basically level the whole thing. It doesn't have nearly as long a range as the walking barrage. It's very similar to like the 120. It just has a much longer cooldown. This one is also really good, but I find that the 120 usually does the job just fine, and the 380 has a much longer cooldown, so I find it to be a little bit weaker. That being said, you could stack both of these on top of one another, and that's really fun, as well as you could also take like the walking barrage, and you're definitely going to level something with that, as long as you're getting somewhere close to it. So 380 is also going to go up into A tier. I think it's really good as well. Up next, we have the Orbital Rail Cannon Strike. This one is basically the Precision Strike, but it has an auto-targeting feature on it. It does take longer to come up, about 3 times as long as the Precision Strike does, which is kind of a bit rough, but you do just throw this one out and it will target either the nearest enemy, or this one can target the bot buildings, which is really good. Targeting the bot buildings is kind of cool, although you could also take like EATs or the Precision Strike and do basically the same job, but then you don't have to wait for the cooldown. Either way, this one is kind of guaranteed, so that's kind of nice. This one can take out basically all of the bots besides like the Factory Strider. That's the only one that it really can't. It does try to lock onto the biggest nearby target when it does fire, and it can lock onto things like tanks, the Striders, the Hulks, so you usually get a pretty decent amount of value out of this. I think this is actually the best against the bots as opposed to the squids or the bugs, so I'm going to put this one up into A tier. I don't think it's quite as good as the Precision Strike, just because that one comes up so much more often. You can throw out about 3 of these before the rail cannon comes up again, and that means you could potentially take out like 3 tanks, and you have more control over the Precision Strike. You just have to be more accurate with it, whereas this one you can kind of just throw it and forget about it. Then we got the Orbital Laser. This one is really cool, and this one's actually really good against the bots. I think it might be the best against the bots because once again it can target structures as opposed to just targeting regular enemies. You only get 3 of these every mission though, so once you use them up you don't get them anymore. So if you're going on particularly long missions, the laser can be a little bit awkward, or if your mission is just taking a little bit longer, then the laser can be kind of awkward if you use up all 3 pretty early on. This will just target anything in the area. It will try to prioritize the biggest target first though, so if there's like a tank, it'll try to go for that, unless there's like a Factory Strider, or maybe there's a Hulk that it's right next to, and it'll just go from enemy to enemy, and it, like I said, this will prioritize buildings too, so you can knock those out. The laser is actually really, really good against the bots, and it can be really nice if you're going on any of the missions that have the convoy on them, where throwing down the laser is really effective. You can pretty much guarantee to take out like 2 of the Factory Striders thanks to that. I'm going to put this one up into S tier, but it's just kind of barely up there because it is very, very useful and it's very valuable. But if you do find yourself consistently going on much longer missions and using this one up, I could totally see arguing this down to A tier, because you do only have the 3 of them. There's no way to get more of them. And once those are out, or if you throw it in a really inconvenient area, which sometimes happens with the laser, it feels terrible whenever that happens, because then you just lost one of your 3 lasers. It's not like any of the other orbitals where if you lose them, it doesn't really matter. You're going to get to use them again. Up next, we have the Orbital EMS Strike. This one is the non-lethal strike that you can drop on enemies. This one is probably the best against the bots, because throwing it down and then throwing something else that kind of lingers in the area, whether that be one of the other barrages or the Gatling barrage, or like the Poison Strike, that's actually not such a bad idea. And it's going to be much easier to hit multiple enemies with this, because generally there's not tons of swarming bugs or the squids, where the EMS Strike just isn't as useful against them. That being said though, the EMS Strike is still not very great against the bots. It doesn't really do that much of a job other than locking them down in place. And if you kind of want to do this, you have the EMS turret, and that one's just going to be better. The mortar is better than this, since it can at least target multiple enemies, and it can spread out more pressure. This does have a very short cooldown though, which is good. I feel like this one should have an even shorter cooldown, since it doesn't actually directly damage enemies. And stun locking an enemy for like 5 to 10 seconds sounds really strong, and is very strong on like the lower difficulties. On the higher difficulties though, it's not such a big deal. If you're going to be taking this, you're always going to want to pair it with something else, though, either like the Gas Strike or a different barrage like the Gatling barrage, or you're going to want to mix it with a turret so that you can just kind of like lock enemies down and then have either yourself or your other stratagems clear them up. So the EMS Strike I'm going to put into C tier. I think that one could definitely use a buff. Then we got the Orbital Gas Strike, one of my favorite stratagems. This one is pretty cool. This one you get at level 1. You can throw it out pretty quickly because it's only a 4-button input. It has a very low cooldown on it, and it just drops a gas strike, which the actual projectile from the gas can knock out buildings if you throw it directly on it, so you can use this like a precision strike if you would like. It does do some damage to things like tanks, but it's not going to outright kill them. And then this also has gas that lingers in the area. This can confuse enemies. It can also deal damage over time and kill them. So that's pretty cool. The gas is really good. It's probably the weakest against the bots, where it is really, really strong against the bugs and the squids. Again, this is more for crowd control, and you don't necessarily need that, but with how short a cooldown this has, and the fact that you can also knock out buildings with it, it's still really good. I'm going to put this one up into A tier. It's very nice. And then our very last orbital is the Orbital Smoke Strike, which this one sadly just isn't very strong. It can be strong, especially on certain bot missions if they come around. We did have one bot mission in Helldivers that was extremely annoying to do at a certain point when it was evacuate civilians, when they would just keep spawning and spawning more and more bots. And generally the way to beat that mission was just to stack a bunch of smoke, at least on one person that could escort the citizens while everybody else just drags them out of the town. So it was really necessary at that point in time, but that mission hasn't been around in forever. So you don't really need to worry about that. Smoke is mostly there just to obscure an area so that you can potentially not get shot, which this is probably best against the bots as opposed to the squids or the bugs, where this doesn't always help you. But even then, I would still rather have something that's actively doing damage or actively can kind of keep things at bay. I would even say like the EMS Strike might be a little bit better than this one, because at least that locks down an area. So if I can funnel the bots into a choke point, I can at least throw that there and kind of slow them down. With this, it's mostly going to be either for repositioning or for retreating from a different position whenever they're trying to attack me. In which case, then this one's okay, but I could also do the same thing with like smoke grenades, and I would rather just have that, since this, even though it has a fairly short cooldown, it feels like it takes much longer for this to like come back up. And again, if I was going to do this, I might just take like the Eagle smoke run, just because I get more uses of it. And even then, that one's still not way great. So this one's also going to be into C tier. This is where I put all the orbital strikes against the bots. Tell me your thoughts on this one. What do you guys think, and where would you place these? I'm really curious to hear about that. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.